Hey everyone, just a quick content warning. This episode does make mention of depression and suicidal ideation. If you or someone you know is struggling with their mental health, you can access support at the National Suicide and Crisis Lifeline by dialing 988.
Hey there, friends. It's Michael Osinski.
And it's Tyler Esselman.
And you are listening to This One Goes to 11.
This One Goes to 11, our podcast where we invite someone each week to make their case for what they believe is a perfect album.
So perfect, in fact, that 10 out of 10 just isn't good enough.
No, they just gotta get an extra point.
Yeah, take it to 11. So Tyler.
Yes.
Your thoughts on cats. Not the musical, just as creatures, as pets.
I'm pro cat.
Okay.
I am. You might remember my feline friend from college, Colby.
Yes, I do.
I didn't have a great love for cats before Colby, but when roommate and friend of the pod, Jared Hecht, proposed getting a cat at that time, I was skeptical, but was so glad we did. I found I was more of a cat person than I thought I might be.
Okay.
Yeah, I know you. I know you have a great love for cats. Are you having cat heart pangs these days?
Yeah, I mean we definitely have a shrine on our wall. No, it's not a shrine, but we have 3 framed pictures of each of the cats we had when we had Rudy and Rambo.
Yeah.
And it's been a while, and I think we are definitely missing pet companions, and we will get cats again at some point, but now is not the time. So
I'm in a similar place. I think I could see a dog coming sometime soon, but a cat. Okay, within 5 years, I see a cat or dog in my life, for sure.
A friend of mine once said that it is easier to take care of a baby than a dog.
This, based on my experience, my family's experience managing their pets, their dogs, This is true. 100% true.
Anyway, I'm sure our listeners are wondering why we're talking about cats, and they might not quite understand it until we dive in a little bit further. But this was a great conversation about an album that I think we were waiting for someone to bring forward. Who are we talking to this week, Tyler?
We are talking to Jack Tamburri. Jack Tamburri is a theater artist based in New York, formerly of Philadelphia and Chicago. We have some familiarity with those cities, don't we?
We sure do.
In Chicago, he worked with companies like The Hypocrites, The Neo-Futurists, The Plagiarists, and Mary Archie Theater Company, where he performed repeatedly in the legendary Abby Hoffman Died for Our Sins Festival. In Philadelphia, he worked with Pig Iron Theater Company, the Wilma Theater, Shakespeare in Clark Park, and the now defunct and much beloved Gay Fest, and even collaborated on Michael's Red Lodge, Montana, under the banner of The Antidote. In New York, he conceived and directed the rock music adaptation Peer Gynt and the Norwegian Hoppa Band for Ma Yi Theater Company with writer Mishi Baral, with whom he has made many works of theater and film, including the upcoming Drawing Lessons at Children's Theater Company in Minneapolis. Jack is also an educator who for the last 5 years has been the director of the Conservatory of Theater Arts at SUNY Purchase and is currently enjoying a new role as father to 6-month-old RJ and Ella. I'm sure he likes that role.
I'm sure, yes. Total surprise to me when he mentioned it. I hadn't been in touch with him.
Oh, he's a good guy. This is a really fun one. Brings some real academic rigor, some studiousness to the pod, which is much appreciated, isn't it?
Oh, most definitely. I mean, it's kind of hard to not praise this album, in my opinion, but I am also a child of the 90s, so like that's sort of my jam. But he does make a pretty strong case and has some impressive visuals.
He does.
Not that he like shares with us, but he describes, which I always appreciate. So
yeah, some autonomy of word, as Kristen Linklater would say.
Most definitely.
Well, let's stop faffing about. Let's let the listeners have a taste, shall we?
Yeah, no more faff. All food. Here we go. Without further ado, Jack Tamburri, welcome to This One Goes to 11. How are we doing today?
Oh, we're doing great. Thank you for having me.
Tamburri. Where's your family from, Jack?
Tamburri is Italian.
Yeah.
I think it means drummer, actually.
Ooh.
But I'm not that Italian. It's just father's father. So mostly Irish. I'm half Texas Wasp.
That's a good balance, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
My family's from Bologna.
Ooh.
Yeah, you look at me and you never say, "Oh, that guy's Italian." But I got like a full quarter. I got like a full,
nice.
Yeah, I know. I'm proud of that.
All right, we'll get you both on Stanley Tucci's show. Let's get down to business here, okay? All right. So, Jack, for those of our listeners who don't read, would you mind telling us what album hath thou brought before the tribunal today?
I hath brought Siamese Dream, the 1993 album by the Smashing Pumpkins.
Yes. Mm-hmm. This is the one I would have chosen too, not to show my cards too much before we get into the case. But I was gratified to see this one instead of Melancholy. You know.
We'll talk about it. Yeah. I think there's argument for the masterpiece status of either.
Sure.
Actually, I just put Melancholy on in its entirety relatively recently, which is something I don't do as often as I put on Siamese Dream in its entirety. Not actually as much filler as I expected.
Really?
A lot of jams on Melancholy. It's a long album and it earns it. But Siamese Dream is just closer to my heart. It had more of an impact on me.
Then you chose the right one. But there are some people out there who may not know Siamese Dream like we do, may not know the Smashing Pumpkins like we do. And conveniently, we have a little segment to catch those people up. Michael, what was the name of that segment again?
The name of that segment is Beginner's Guide to the Smashing Pumpkins Siamese Dream in 60 seconds.
Yes, and so Michael's going to be doing it today. And as you build your case, this is your opportunity, Jack, as you might well know, to assess Michael on the job that he does, condensing the history of Corgan and Co. and this album down into 60 seconds in whatever terms you see fit.
Okay.
Michael, you feel ready?
Yeah, I'm good. We're Jack and I are fellow directors, so we're used to feedback. We know how this goes. So.
Love that. Yeah, just frame that feedback however you think he's best going to receive it. All right, I've got 60 seconds on the clock. We're starting in 3, 2, 1, go.
Despite all his rage, cat enthusiast Billy Corgan has managed to keep Smashing Pumpkins together? No. Alive? Sure. Formed in 1988, when Corgan came back home to Chicago and worked at a record store on the Northwest Side. Guitarist James Iha came first, then bassist Darcy Retzky, and finally drummer Jimmy Chamberlain, who was recruited so they could open for Jane's Addiction, a band they would later be compared to. Their first album, Gish, was produced in 1991 by Nirvana's producer Butch Vig. The recording would set the tone for the band's career. A depressed and obsessively perfectionist Corgan ended up playing most of the instruments, while Iha and Retzky broke up and Chamberlain discovered drugs. 2 years later, they traveled down to Georgia to keep Chamberlain away from drugs and record their second album, Siamese Dream, which turned out 4 singles in the 90s and a 5th single in 2023. It brought them mainstream success, going quadruple platinum, and a lot of haters, mostly indie artists and fans who felt betrayed. They had another hit album before they went electronic, and then went through a few shakeups and breakups, but now they're mostly back together, minus Darcy, and they've hired a new guitarist to start touring again.
Ooh, yes. Oh, you're back in your rich
back
vein of form, aren't you? Yeah. You're in your bag, as the kids say. Dang. All right, Jack. What do you think? How would you assess that one?
That was strong. I appreciate that you mentioned the cats. It's a shame that you didn't find space for Billy Corgan's professional ventures as a producer of professional wrestling.
Yes.
Yeah, I know.
And the owner of a tea house in Highland Park, right?
Yes. Mm-hmm. And I also have a quibble. I would say that Nirvana's Nevermind was recorded by Smashing Pumpkins' producer, Butch Vig.
An important distinction.
Yeah.
Well, it's from the perspective of a 2024 listener. I'm just saying, I mean, and also we could get into the whole thing that Butch Vig didn't produce In Utero, right? Didn't they ditch Butch Vig after the first one?
Yes, they did.
So
yeah. They went to Steve Albini,
who had some things to say about Smashing Pumpkins.
A lot of people had some things to say about Smashing Pumpkins. Yeah. I would. Is it my obligation to score your performance at this point?
Whatever sort of evaluation tool or whatever you want to say. Yes.
I would give that 33 guitar overdubs that you snuck back into the studio to re-record after everyone else went home.
You have understood the assignment, Jack. Okay, we're talking a lot of pumpkin lore here. But before we do that, there's a question we like to ask all of our guests, Jack, which is, what's your relationship with music, past and present?
Well, my parents are classical musicians. Music was a part of my household in my life from a very young age. I was dressed up and brought to concerts from as early as I can remember. But something that was important to them was not to attempt to limit the scope of my interest in music. And so at a pretty early age, probably 7 or 8, I was radicalized by a cassette dub of the B-52's Cosmic Thing that I was given by a babysitter.
Wow.
Hell yeah.
That sort of started me on my journey, let's say. I was seriously interested in music and popular culture as a child, an adolescent, probably up until my 30s, went to grad school and stopped caring about anything new.
Dang, yeah, that happens, doesn't it?
Yeah. Well, it's all bad.
That's the thing, is when music starts being bad to us at a certain point.
So I'm curious about your addition of the phrase "to us," but yes, yeah, absolutely.
I think it's the royal us. I acknowledge
Sure.
I acknowledge the generational the generational gap, though not as broad as some might think, but I'm experiencing that now with a lot of these, like, you just hear about these TikTok artists and I'm like, where did these people come from? I have, like, they just sprout from, yeah.
My devotion to sort of guitar-based music is deep for me. It's pretty lifelong. And also I recognize that that's a pretty limited palette. Over what, 60, 70 years, 80 years, folks have done quite a lot with it, but actually within a very compressed range of sounds, all things considered. I am curious about whether guitar rock, what its future is, whether it has a future, or if that time is sort of behind us.
Well, I don't know. That's what the Pumpkins were asking themselves at the end of the 90s, though, right? They were like,
absolutely.
Rock's over. Wasn't that the whole thing? And now they're back to doing it. Where does that land for you?
In the last 24 years, the Smashing Pumpkins have released a number of albums that I haven't heard.
This is something people this season keep saying, is they're like, I stopped listening to this band after a certain point.
And I say this as a devoted fan.
Yeah.
I was deeply with the Pumpkins through Machina, and there are tracks on that album that I maintain absolutely rip.
Mm-hmm.
But after the first breakup, I heard Zwan. It was all right. I gave his solo record a spin, and Latter Day Pumpkins. I've tried this week. The recipe has changed.
Mm-hmm.
And that's okay. And he has every right, and they have every right to continue exploring what interests them musically. But the recipe's changed. It's not what I connect with about Smashing Pumpkins.
Sure. I'll give you. You need some points. I'll give you 40,000 points for this question about where does guitar music go next, which I think is it's an important one. And then I'll say 50,000 for acknowledging that the recipe for one of your favorite bands has changed, because that's an important level of consideration to have with any artist, right?
I feel like this happens a lot too with artists, especially rock artists, because if you think about, like after OK Computer, here we go. Radiohead.
Let's go.
Radiohead has entered the chat. After OK Computer.
Okay, what?
Okay, you shut up. You shut up, Jack. After that album,
I'm not familiar.
Oh my God!
We're gonna blow your mind.
So many people were like, oh, when are they gonna get back to the guitar rock of the bands and what? And they never have. But then I think about the band whose shirt I am touting today, Pearl Jam came out with a new album this year, and I really dig it because it sounds a lot more like older Pearl Jam stuff.
Sure.
I feel
Sure.
I don't know if this is just a thing that happens with artists, especially rock artists. I feel because I don't know, when artists enter the pop realm or any other sort of genre except for country, where those country followers have electric fences around the boundaries of that genre, but
yeah,
it's just hard for people to change as much in rock. We want that thing that they first were known for. I don't know, that's kind of what I've experienced.
I think a couple things. One is, the college where I teach, 2 nights ago, 50 students and some faculty were arrested. And so I'm not really in the headspace to be saying it is the children who are wrong.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's on the part of the listener and on the part of the artist, right? Like the narrative that Billy Corgan has sort of expressed about the origins of this record are that he was experiencing a low point in his mental and emotional health. He was suicidal, and it was sort of, pull the plug or make this record. And I think there's an urgency in the material that reveals that state. Now, you don't have to be suicidal to make a great record, obviously. And being suicidal doesn't guarantee that you'll make a great record. True. But there is some kind of necessity to the project.
The stakes, yeah.
And I think that, not that rich people can't make good art, because, I mean, God, we're theater makers. So there is something that changes about perspective when you are a touring band that sold a lot of records in the 90s at the height of the recording industry.
Yeah.
Your life is different. Your perspective is different. Your concerns are different. And that just goes along with the change in perspective of simply aging.
Yeah.
And then on the part of the listener, I think Yassi Salek has said it best many, many times, right? What hits you when you're at your most sort of adolescent and vulnerable, when your emotional self is still sort of under construction, and in its most inflamed and heightened state, that's the stuff that hits you deepest and that stays with you. That's the stuff that informs the shape of your sensibility, right? You build yourself around some of those things. They're going to matter more to you than anything that hits you later, and they're just going to continue to matter the most, I think. I think there's just a calcification of sensibility that is inevitable.
Is it? Do we have to calcify?
Well, I don't know. I that's a good question.
Because it would be great not to, right? It would be great for me. It would be great for me to say, like, oh man, I really get, what is it, 100 Gex? This is the band that always comes up. Or 1,000 Gex, that crazy internet band. Like, it would be great for me to say, like, oh yeah, I hell yeah, I kind of get it, instead of it grating against me. I'm trying to figure out what frictious surface in me can be softened to leave me more open to it.
Well, first off, that band sounds fake, but okay.
Yeah, industry plant, right? They have.
Yeah. No, I think I would like to think that in other areas of my interest, I have maintained an open mind, a veracity, a promiscuity that I have not necessarily maintained when it comes to pop music. By which I mean anything that isn't experimental or art music, right? And I would classify, especially in the context of the mid-90s, this is what counts as a pop record, right?
Yeah.
Yes.
And we can talk, we can quibble about sort of instrumentation and like the difference between pop and rock and all that. But in my taxonomy, pop is the heading within which there's rock, there's various kinds of dance music, there's hip hop, there's all these sorts of, right?
Yeah.
Just as opposed to, what assholes might call serious music.
Well, this is bringing me a thought about classical music and what space that occupies now, especially given your origins.
Yeah.
Given your origins with that, I mean, like, it's something where I'm always like, man, I wish I had this energy to dive into whatever's happening in contemporary classical music now.
I do not have my finger on the pulse of contemporary classical music. Yeah. So that's not an area where I am particularly adept, though it's not something I eschew or fear. And if someone wants to put it on, I'll listen.
We've mentioned this album already once or twice, maybe this season. But maybe this new Andre 3000 album is contemporary classical music, and I've listened to it a lot.
I mean, at the very least, I think it can be called experimental simply because of its cultural context, right? Yeah. When an artist of that stature within his milieu puts out something that is so aggressively different from his prior output and the expectations around future output, I think that's clearly an experiment.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, we got to talk about Smashing Pumpkins. Okay, we got to. Right. So you mentioned earlier that there's a case for Melancholy as a perfect album, which of course we're leaving that open for somebody else to bring someday. But let's talk about Siamese Dream and how you fell in love with this album in particular.
So I will say, I would say there's a case for Melancholy as a masterpiece. I wouldn't bring Melancholy to the table as a perfect album. Maybe that's a quibble. I first encountered the Smashing Pumpkins and this music when Disarm was released as a single. So that would have been the spring of 1994, a few months after the album has been released. I'm 11 years old. I'm in 6th grade. And whenever I'm in the car with a parent, they're letting me pick what's on the radio. God bless them.
Yeah.
And I'm putting on Z100, which is the New York area's leading contemporary top 40 station, right? Which is in the process of making a pivot to quote unquote alternative music, which is a funny thing to say about a commercial top 40 radio station.
Yes.
And I think indicates some things about what quote unquote alternative music actually was, which is to say pop music. I have a very clear snapshot of the intersection in my town in New Jersey that we were at when I first heard those Tubular Bells of Disarm, right? And it infected me immediately, that song. The drama of it, the prettiness of it, the tension between the sort of caterwaul vocals and the string arrangements and timpani. I immediately loved the song, wanted to hear more of it. I have a longtime friend who was my friend then also. His name is Mark, and he has been you know those friends who are sort of your musical North Star?
Yes.
He has older siblings. He introduced me to 9 Inch Nails through a cassette dub of Pretty Hate Machine, probably in 4th or 5th grade. That's actually their perfect album, just so you know.
Ooh.
It's
fight. You two fight.
But you know, he introduced me to the Cardigans, to a lot of really thrilling metal and sort of experimental noise stuff later on. Like he's really been there for me in this way. He copied me Siamese Dream. I think his older brother had the CD. And for a few years, all I had was this tape dub with the song titles written on it. So I had no context. I knew nothing about. I didn't have any of this extremely garish and sentimental album art to sort of create a sense of like what the album's intentions were. Right. I was fully projecting onto the song titles and what I was perceiving. I think having that relationship to it through this tape really helped it sink in and really helped me own it. I probably bought a CD of it, I don't know, in high school at some point. This album has never left rotation. It has never gotten old to me. It's never fallen out of my favor. It's never bored me. And I almost always want to put on the whole thing. Mm-hmm. Very rarely do I want to hear a song from Siamese Dream. I want to hear Siamese Dream. Yeah. So to me, this album has no skips. It is perennially contemporary, and it's got a coherence of vision. It's a very consistent sound, and that may bore some. I don't think it's at a length where the consistency becomes problematic for me. And I think one of the strengths of Melancholy is that at its length, they really change up the sound quite a lot, much more than they change up in Siamese Dream.
That's a good point.
But I think Siamese Dream simply coheres beautifully.
It's only just over an hour long, like it's an episode of television that we watch, that we watch nowadays. It's not like as short as our attention spans might be getting, and maybe shorter by the day. I do think an hour is a very reasonable length for an album.
Mm-hmm. It's simply gorgeous. From opening to closing, it's incredibly well sequenced. It takes you on a journey. What it's on about was powerfully meaningful to me as a pre-adolescent, and therefore has remained so.
Let me give you a whole bunch of points. I previously gave you 100,000 points for that idea about our sensibility becoming calcified, particularly about pop music, which I think is actually something that bears more investigation. So I'm putting a big bookmark on that. Maybe today, maybe just on a future episode or something like that. But then 1,000,000 points for the intersection that you were at where you heard the Tubular Bells of Disarm for the first time. Love that. 3 million points for talking about how this has never left rotation in over 30 years. I mean, that's kind of it right there, isn't it?
Yeah, to me, yeah.
So if Disarm was your song, your way into the album, like when you heard the whole thing, because I will say that song doesn't quite sound like the rest of the album, because there is a lot more like orchestral accompaniment to it. And yeah, well, I mean, maybe we can get into it. I wish I could find a way to describe the Smashing Pumpkins sound. Like there's something about the way the guitars are produced that they sound, they sound like if guitars were nasal in some ways. I don't know what's happening there, but I guess I'm just wondering, like, when you listened to the rest of the album, did it matter that the rest didn't quite sound like Disarm, or was Disarm just the way into this like beautiful forest of amazing music?
That one. Yeah. No, but I think before I heard the rest of the album, I probably also heard Today.
Oh yeah.
Which is also extremely pretty, extremely poppy, but definitely more sonically akin to what's going on in the rest of the album than Disarm is.
Yeah.
And it's not like Surfer Rosa, right? Where like you hear Where Is My Mind, and then you put on that album and you go, what the fuck is this?
Yeah.
So, which like, that album gave me homework, and I love that about that album, and I learned a lot from getting into the album. This is different. This was pretty immediately, like, from that opening snare roll, I was in. There was no challenge here, even based on my love of Disarm.
I want to know more about that. Like in a way that some albums are challenging but still capture our hearts. I'm trying to figure out what makes an album immediately accessible and to feel like home.
It's just endlessly pretty. This is as pretty as distorted redlined electric guitars get.
Yeah.
Right. Mm-hmm. The overdubs, the harmonies, like it's just pretty.
Yeah.
There's no other word for how these. There's lots of other words for how these guitars sound, but pretty is one of them.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And so there's nothing very discordant that you have to wrap your mind around, except possibly Corgan's vocal style. But
I was just gonna say that.
But it's 1993. Our culture. I myself hadn't necessarily experienced these things, but our culture has experienced punk, no wave, and Kurt Cobain, and the presence of an idiosyncratic, discordant vocal is not problematic. It's part of the musical landscape, and it's something you incorporate into your understanding and appreciation of the music. And I actually think that his sort of nasally, screechy yowling or cooing, his particular idiosyncratic vocal style, in tension with the prettiness of the orchestrations and the arrangements, is sort of key to what I love about this album. It's a beautiful mixture of pleasure and pain. It's a beautiful mixture of difficult emotions, grief, sadness, fear, anxiety, rage, in a landscape that is just, it's profound. It's gorgeous. It's something to be grateful for.
Yeah.
And that tension actually shows up repeatedly in the lyrics, I think. The pain of being an outsider and his gratitude for the perspective that being an outsider has given him. That I think Hummer is sort of the mission statement in that regard.
Okay, so this, I think you might be expressing something that might sort of quote unquote explain why they shot ahead of those other bands that were in the scene in terms of like commercial success and commercial appeal. That fine balance of pretty and ugly that clearly there was a great craving for.
Well, and let's talk about the class of 1993. I mean, right before this album comes out, you've got the nuclear bomb of Exile in Guyville. You've got the nuclear bomb of Bjork's debut. Mm-hmm. Like, Ugly Pretty is what's for dinner.
Yeah, totally. Okay, yeah, you get 4 million points for Ugly Pretty is what's for dinner.
Well, okay. I think the time has come for us to let our listeners, if they haven't already in their lives heard Smashing Pumpkins, we should let them listen to your standout track. Which, Jack, what are you going to choose in this moment? What feels like the standout track?
I think in this moment right now, I'm feeling like I want to go with Mayonnaise.
Great.
Okay.
It's a fan favorite. It's a legendary live song. It was released as a single from the album, actually, I think in 2022.
2023, according to my research. Yeah.
Yeah. I think off the back of its inclusion in a television show or something.
Yes, it was in Beef.
Yes. That's right.
That old Steve Young vehicle.
Okay, don't say any more. We got to listen to it. But when we come back, we'll say lots more about it. Dear listeners, if you're listening to us on Spotify or on the YouTube playlist, you're about to hear the whole song. If you're listening to us on Apple Podcasts, you're going to hear just a little snippet of it. But either way, you'll hear more from us on the other side.